let's get started. So thank you for taking time this morning. We're really happy to see such a big crowd listening in. We're going to talk about the UK Freeports, and we have an hour. We are going to do it in 3 blocks, and then we have a Q&A towards the end. For questions and answers, so feel free to use the Q&A function in Zoom to post any questions throughout the webinar, and then we're going to hopefully get to all questions at the end. The questions we'll not get a chance to answer today during the call, during the webinar, we'll come back to a person who posted a question afterwards. We will also send the recording and the slides afterwards. We'll send it later during this week. And we also have polling questions that we'll pull up on the screen in a moment. And the polling questions you can answer throughout the webinar whenever you take time, and we'll pull up the results for everybody to see at the end in the Q&A, but the answers are anonymized, so you will not be able to see who said what, but we thought it's probably interesting for everyone to see what the answers are. So without further ado, let me continue, and if we can have the next slide, please. So that's the introduction, basically. So who are we? I'm joined by my colleagues Juliet and Nick. They will speak later, and so they get a chance to introduce themselves. But we are all part of the BDO National Customs team, and based in different locations and working very closely together with our other colleagues in the UK and also with the BDO member firms outside the UK. So if we move on to the next slide, that is where we have the polling questions. So these questions are, of course, relevant to the webinar today. There should be a pop-up screen coming up there where you can just answer the questions. Again, it's anonymous, so don't be nervous about saying it the way it is. We're basically curious about how much do you know about Freeports and how much preparation have you done in terms of looking at, is this something that will benefit your business? I think we'll leave the poll screen on there for a moment, but Natalie, if we can move on to the next slide, I'll just introduce what it is that we're going to talk about. So that's the webinar run order. Let me just move the poll screen away. So first I will talk a bit about where the Freeports in the UK are, and a bit about the background of Freeports, and very, very briefly about the benefits. And then Juliet will explain a lot more about the customs benefits specifically. And finally, then Nick will talk about the alternative to Freeports, really, which is customs warehouse and inward processing relief, the old customs special procedures that you're probably all familiar with. So how do they compare to Freeports? What are the benefits? That's pretty much the theme for today's session. So that's the run order, and I think hopefully you've had a chance now to look at the polling questions. So let us move on to that first section here about basically an overview of the Freeports. So next slide, please. So what are Freeports, and is it something that is unique for the UK? Well, not really. Freeports exist all over the world. There's an estimated 3,500 Freeports or similar arrangements across the globe. Sometimes they're called special economic zones, or sometimes just free zones, and sometimes Freeports. There is no established kind of definition of a free port, but what they have in common is that there are physical locations, often at a seaport, airport, inland terminal. It's an area that is geographically inside the country, like the UK's Freeports are inside the UK, but from a customs point of view, they're outside the UK's customs territory. So that means that basically the goods are in the country, but they are not subject to the standard customs regulations and duty. So what is the whole purpose really of free ports? Why do countries offer this? Well, it really comes down to engaging businesses, trying to grow trade, grow economic, have economic growth. So by offering these advantages, it is good for the local economy and is good for the country. What is often happening, and that's indeed the case in the UK, is that businesses operating in free ports can do both storing and processing of goods. That's the normal situation. And so it is a rather broad use, and it's typically targeted for domestic companies, but it's also, of course, to some extent something that makes it more interesting for foreign investors. So it comes down to that it's about generating growth, economic wealth, and is often a way to encourage the local economy. So when you look at where the free ports are, it is often in areas that are in need of regeneration, or for any other reasons where the government feels like this is an area that we want to focus on, and we want to create sustained long-term economic growth. There's a sort of urban myth that while the UK was part of the EU, the UK was not allowed to have free ports. That's not really true. It is true to say that EU has, especially over the recent years, encouraged customs warehousing and inward processing relief as an alternative to free ports. But there are many free ports in the EU, about 80. There's even a free port on Isle of Man. So free ports exist in the EU, but after Brexit, this is something that the government has really gone for, and has come up as an alternative to the traditional customs warehousing and inward processing relief. So enough said about that. I think move on to the next slide, where we talk about where we'll talk about, this is more actually what I was saying here. Sorry about that. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So we have 8 free ports in the UK. Currently, all the 8 are in England, and there is an ambition from the government that there will be free port, at least one in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, respectively. But the 8 free ports that we have are in England. They are not considered really to be operational until there's at least some activity established there. So out of the 8 free ports, it wasn't until November last year that the first became operational. And when you look at where they are located, again, comes back to what I said earlier about trying to stimulate the local economy. That's often the motivation for where they are located. Okay, let's move on to the next slide, please. So the benefits, Now, I'm not going to talk about the customs benefits because Julia will talk about that in detail, but the other benefits that we group under just the term tax benefits, we talk about direct tax benefits. This is, again, is different for different countries, but for the UK, these are the direct tax benefits that the government has focused on. So there is a stamp duty land tax exemption. So that is when you are setting up a site inside a free port. There is also an NIC benefit. So when you have a site inside the free port and you employ people who are full-time employed in the free port, well, part-time, but their workplace is within the free port, then you have advantages there. And finally, capital allowances. So that is if you are actually building or maintaining buildings, or if you're investing in capital, such as capital investments, such as IT, etc. So all these tax benefits are there to encourage businesses to really set up shop inside the free port. And before I hand over to Juliette, just want to mention that the terminology is really important when it comes to the free ports. There are many different actors, and it's easy to get confused about what is the difference between a free port business and, say, a free port customs site operator. So bear that in mind, that when we talk about free ports, sometimes it gets a bit technical, but it's really important because there are many different actors for different responsibilities. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Juliette. Thank you.
Thanks, Håkan. Good morning, everybody. As Håkan said, what I'm going to talk about now are the specific customs benefits of operating within a free port. Next slide, please. So as Håkan mentioned then, when we talk about free ports, there are a number of tax benefits, and customs benefits just forms one of those wider tax benefits. And I think it's, for what I want to say, I think it's really key to remember this. There are far wider and more reasons for considering a free port than just the customs or even just the indirect tax benefits themselves. So what I'm going to talk through now for the next 10 minutes is what customs benefits you can get in a free port and how the customs legislation is structured around free ports, and then after myself, my colleague Nick is going to talk you through the alternatives as we mentioned. So what customs benefits can you have if you choose to operate in a free port? Well, the first one is, as we said, whilst a free port is physically located in the UK, it has a different tax status. So if you bring goods in and you enter them to a customs site within a free port, you defer any duty and import VAT that you would otherwise pay at import. And if those goods remain in a customs site and then you subsequently re-export them from the UK, that duty and import VAT liability does not crystallise. So in other words, you don't pay duty and import VAT on anything which you don't bring into what's called free circulation in the UK, which comes in, stays in a customs site in a free port, and thereafter is re-exported. So if you think about it, that is the storage benefit of operating. That's the storage customs benefit of operating in a free port. Free ports also offer processing customs benefits. So if, for example, you were bringing materials in and you have a manufacturing or an assembly operation within a free port, and if the duty rate on what you are importing on the imported materials is higher than the duty rate on what you are producing and then selling to customers in the UK, something called duty inversion takes place, and you can opt which rate of duty you want to pay. And in many instances, you would pay the lower or zero rate of duty on the finished goods. So that's where import, manufacturing, and sale to a UK customer, the manufacturing taking place within a free port. Another processing benefit was if you imported into a free port and again you manufactured or you assembled in that facility within the free port and then you re-exported your finished product, you would not pay duty or import VAT on the goods that you have manufactured in that free port. The manufacturing and the subsequent export negates any liability you have there. So we've got one storage benefit and, if you will, two processing benefits. In all three cases, you are legally avoiding paying duty and import VAT. Now, you can have a number of businesses operating in a customs site within a free port. Very much, for example, in some of the manufacturing industry sectors, and I'm thinking, for example, of automotive, if you have a number of tier 1 entities all in similar locations and goods are being imported, processed, and then further processed in a supply chain, those companies that are operating in the same free port, we understand they can move goods between storaging and processing far more easily, both internally in their own record keepings and to customers who are further down the supply chain. So administratively, it is easier to operate those customs reliefs if you are within a free port. The paperwork, the returns, the declarations that you need to complete to HMRC are far less than if you to operate similar reliefs outside the free port area. Further, if you will, easements on processing and storage reliefs. So normally, if you were to operate a processing or a storage relief outside a free zone, there are certain areas that HMRC can focus on. Things like audit trails and particularly throughput periods. So how long is it taking you to complete the action that effectively allows you to negate the duty? Because you are already operating in a secure and highly regulated environment in a free port, the activities that you do within that tend to face less administrative requirements from HMRC. Next slide, please. So how does it work, and effectively what are the roles of businesses and who does what within a free port? So as Håkan mentioned earlier, we have the various free port locations within, at the moment, England. Now, within a free port, you can have tax sites and you can have customs sites. So a customs site will bring you the benefits that I was referring to on the previous slide. However, in order to have what's called a customs site within a free port, you have to have a customs site operator or a CSO. And this CSO has to be authorised by HMRC. They have to apply to and be approved by HMRC to act as a CSO or a customs site operator. And what does this entail and what are their responsibilities? So the CSO is effectively responsible for the security and the safety of goods on that customs site. They have overall responsibility for record keeping within that customs site, and they act as the first point of contact with HMRC, Border Force, or whichever government agency has a particular interest in that customs site. So if you will, they are the first point of contact and they have overarching responsibility. Now, to mention here, when we talk about site security and safety, the government has, or HMRC has, high expectations and high standards here. If you think about it, we have goods coming into a free port where duty and import VAT is being suspended and potentially negated depending on the process or the storage carried out. So there is a revenue risk to the authorities. So they expect customs site operators to have very secure and strong site safety and security measures in place. Now, we have an accreditation in the UK, some of you may be aware of it, it's called Authorised Economic Operator, which is shortened to AEO. For those who aren't aware of it, it's akin to an ISO 9000 accreditation. It's something that is granted by HMRC to individual businesses, and it's granted following a fairly robust application process where the applicant has to fill out a questionnaire and demonstrate to HMRC that they have very good processes, procedures and controls in place, which are documented and followed to ensure that goods do not go awry, effectively to show that at every stage in the supply chain, the applicant knows the exact location and nature of those goods it is responsible for. It is a fairly strenuous, but not unachievable accreditation to obtain. So the customs site operator has to have that. Now, within a customs site, you could just have one entity, which is the customs site operator, who also carries out their either processing, storage, or both activities within that site. You could, however, also have additional businesses, so free port businesses operating within that customs site and covered by the CSO's authorization for security and safety. So the CSO is therefore effectively, to a degree, responsible for the compliance of the free port businesses. Now, the free port business themselves, however, do also have to apply to HMRC to operate what's called free port customs special procedures within the customs site. And there is an application form that the businesses need to complete, depending on, and it's a fairly extensive and lengthy form, and it's completed depending on whether the company wishes to operate a storage and or a processing activity. And within that application form, the free port business is required to give details of what they wish to do, what goods they wish to store, what materials they wish to process, as well as assurances, again, to HMRC that they have documented procedures and controls in place to show that they can establish audit trails and have good record keeping. Again, it's always at the back of HMRC's mind that this whole area is a potential revenue loss risk. We are talking about activities being undertaken which allow duty to be legally avoided, so HMRC always insist on fairly robust documentation, audit trails and reporting requirements. So as you can see, therefore, we've got, if you will, at the head of the thing, we have the CFO, CSO. They have certain responsibilities, particularly the AOS. If they don't want to go for the AOS, it's equivalent. And then, as I said, you can have independent other businesses operating within the customs site. Now, the idea is that once you have got the approval, if you are all operating within a customs site, as I mentioned earlier, and again, I'm particularly thinking about industries where we've got fairly complex supply chains, the benefit is you should be able to move goods around and change them from different customs procedures more easily than you could if you were operating those procedures outside of the free zone, and also if you are selling to or buying from customers or suppliers within the free port. This should be able to be done with a far lighter administrative burden than if you were carrying on and doing that separately in the UK. Okay, I think that is me covered on structure and administration, so I'm going to hand over Nick now to go through customs alternatives to a free port.
Thank you, Juliet, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for your time today. Next slide, please. So the last part of today's session, I think, worth going through and understanding is around special procedures. These have been around for quite a while now. A lot of businesses have been using them in the run-up to Brexit, and I think certainly post-Brexit, lots of businesses that are quite interested in this area. You'll actually note the eagle-eyed among you is that free zones do form part of these special procedures, and as Juliet was just talking about, then actually one of to be able to use a free port, you actually have to go through an application process which involves which is similar to other special procedures in order to use the CPC code, the customs procedure code that's mentioned here, to actually declare your goods to a free port. So the process is quite similar to how you would manage any other process today. And the key areas that that these free ports offer as a benefit are what we call customs warehousing and inward processing. I'll expand upon those in a little bit more detail, but just to take a step back, first of all, just to try and give you an understanding as to why these are a benefit to yourselves as a business. So when we import goods here into the UK, there is a tax point, a dutiable point at that point that we say, okay, we're importing the goods, we declare the goods to HMRC. However, under UK and previously EU law, there are special procedures which allow us to reduce, remove, or basically cancel any requirement to pay customs duties. Now that can be just under a duty suspension, which is a temporary style relief, and then maybe goods duties are due later on, but actually it could be a complete removal of the requirement to pay customs duties at all. And we split them down into four general key areas. We've got storage, processing, transit, and specific use. There are some additional ones to this, but it broadly falls into those. So storage, historically, the main one that you may be aware of is customs or bonded warehousing, as you may know the term. And then you've also got free zones, which also do relate to storage and processing as well. The interesting thing about free zones in some ways is the government made me out to be a bit of a fibber with these. So for the past few years, I've all kind of said that, you know, free zones have never been the thing that that HMRC has liked, and out myself here as an ex-HMRC officer, the internal kind of process was always that they didn't like free zones because they're a lot of work to manage a whole area, whereas with something like customs warehousing or inward processing, you can authorize the specific business in the specific location. So it's interesting to see the change in approach to this. Processing, we have inward and outward processing. So inward processing, I'm going to give us a bit more information about, but outward processing is the opposite to inward processing, in which it's sending goods out for repair or for work to be carried out, and then offsetting values so that when you bring the goods back into the UK, you don't have to pay all of the customs duties associated with it. Again, that removal or reduction in customs duty owing. Transit, external and internal transit. Interestingly, the new Freeport actually has some interesting internal transit rules, which we've found could be very beneficial to a business. But this is effectively when you're moving goods either within or through customs territories, and rather than having to declare and pay customs duties at each point, you can move the goods under a suspensive regime so that you only have to declare the goods as they arrive at their final destination. And then we have specific use, such as temporary admission or end use, which is all about bringing goods in maybe temporarily to show for art pieces, going to galleries or the likes. Or you have end use, which is when you're putting goods to a specific use, such as military, maritime, or aerospace kind of usage. So lots of different ways that these can be used. And what I wanted to do is just show that there are similarities to the benefits that you can get from Freeports and the benefits that you can get now in your current premises. So the next two slides are going to look at that. So next slide, please. So one of the benefits of a Freeport is that you're allowed to store goods without paying customs duty on them. And you can actually do this at the moment with a customs warehouse or a bonded warehouse, as you may know it. So when you bring goods into the UK, you can tell HMRC that you want to suspend that duty payment and move the goods into your customs warehouse. Now, what's great about this is you can store them there indefinitely. You do not have to pay any duty while those goods are stored within that warehouse. So first of all, that's cash flow benefit to yourselves as a business, but also it can be a cost saving. And the reason it could be a cost saving is if you bring goods into the UK, usually you have to pay that customs duty. However, if we suspend that payment, we then have one of two options while those goods are within the warehouse. We can sell it to a UK customer, in which case we have to pay the duties, or the duties that are owing have to be paid, and that's because the goods are remaining here in the UK. Or if we re-export those goods to outside of the UK, to Europe or rest of the world, we can actually discharge that liability to pay customs duty here in the UK because they're not staying here. So what it's effectively means is we bring goods in, we send goods out, but we're not paying the UK portion of that movement of goods. So it can be a great benefit to yourselves as a business, and we've seen lots of businesses work towards this because it's been a huge cost saving, millions of pounds for many businesses that we've worked with. The key thing to consider here is that what customs warehousing does not allow is for you to process the goods. You can't really do anything with them. You may be able to do some what they call usual forms of handling, which is basically minor processing on the products, usually to improve appearance or maintain the goods so that they don't rust or something while they're within the warehouse. But we're not allowed to do any active or complex processing. So you can have this benefit within a Freeport as well. But the great thing about Customs Warehouse is you can have it specifically to your site. So you don't have to go and go through the process of dealing with a CSO. You don't have to go through the process of building a new site. You can actually have your site now reviewed and authorized for this. And the authorization process I'll talk about towards the end of this session. Can I go for the next slide, please? So the limitation of customs warehousing, as I mentioned, is we can't do anything with the goods. So what we can do instead is we could maybe get inward processing. So where customs warehousing doesn't allow us to process the goods, inward processing by its very nature does allow us to actively process goods here within the UK under a duty suspensive relief. So very similar to before, the goods enter the UK, but rather than pay customs duty, we tell HMRC that we would like to suspend this payment of customs duty and bring the goods into our processing relief or IP. Again, we can process these goods under duty suspension. So the duties are still owing, but while we're processing them, we do not have to pay any of those duties. So we bring them in, we do our manufacturing, so we make our widgets into bigger widgets. And again, there we have one of two options usually. So we've brought our goods in, we've not paid any duty at this point, we've processed them, and then we have one of two options. We can sell the goods here in the UK, in which case we will have to pay the customs duty that was originally owing. So because the goods are staying here within the UK, we can sell them here. Or we have the option of re-exportation. So if we re-export these goods outside of the UK, we do not have to pay the customs duty that was owing. We can discharge that liability once again. And that's really helpful because, again, we've got a cash saving there. So it's not just a cash flow advantage, but a direct saving for ourselves. Now, where Freeports work very well is that it allows you typically you can apply for both the storage option and the processing option, which means that you actually have a third option here, which is that you can move the goods into storage, again, under duty suspension, which gives you flexibility. Now, interestingly, you can do that with inward processing. You would just also need a customs warehousing authorization as well. So what we saw before Brexit, and to be fair, lots of businesses have these, is they actually have both. They have an inward processing authorization and they have a customs warehousing authorization to create a cyclical duty suspensive loop. So you bring the goods into customs warehousing, raw material, as and when you need them, you bring them into your inward processing relief. So you process the goods into a finished product, and then you move the goods back into your customs warehouse, all the while keeping that duty suspension. Because the limitation, I think Juliet touched upon it earlier, the limitation with inward processing is the duty. It is the throughput period. So the amount of time it takes for you to process goods, usually in around 3 months, is what HMRC was as standard grant. If you have a longer processing period, HMRC will absolutely consider that, but it's never a guarantee. It's always something that has to be requested, and 3 months is a standard. So it really should be used just for the processing. So you can see that many of the benefits, if not all of the benefits that you can get from a Freeport, you can get from existing processes and procedures. They just package them slightly differently within the Freeport process. So if you've already got a location where you're actively processing on goods, maybe at least for just customs taxes, it may not be worth going that extra mile to setting up into a Freeport. It may do if those other tax benefits are of interest to yourselves as well. Now, next slide, please. Now, to get any of these authorizations, and actually it's the same, Julia already touched on it, but to get any benefits from the Freeport as well, you have to apply to HMRC. It isn't something which is just you can decide to use one day. You need to be authorized by HMRC to say, yes, I want to use this this relief, this reduction in customs duty, because effectively what we're doing is we're creating a tax risk whenever we use one of these special procedures. So that's a ways that we're artificially lowering the amount of duty that's being paid. So when we apply to HMRC, we submit an application form, and we'll have to back that up with evidence. So with all of these things, it's something that HMRC will want to come and visit your premises and to be able to identify and see evidence assurance that you can manage the customer's risk. So you have to have documented controls and procedures in place. This is going to be things like how you manage your third parties, such as freight forwarders. I'm sure you're all aware at the moment, but difficulties with freight forwarders, there's not many of them, and at times accuracy can be quite difficult when it comes to working with freight forwarders. So it's really important that you reduce that risk of incorrect information being submitted to HMRC. They're also going to want to see how you make sure that your customs declarations have been submitted correctly. So you need to have processes around, making sure that you've got the right CPC codes, the right values, commodity codes, and how you do those checks on your declarations. The classification of goods is important. Valuation and origin, they're what we call HMRC's big 3 risk areas. So what is your classification accurate? Is your value accurate that you're declaring the goods on? And is origin accurate? I know that lots of businesses using the free trade agreements between the UK, EU and other countries. All of these present potential tax risks, so you need to demonstrate how you manage such a risk. There also needs to be an appropriate level of customs knowledge within the team. It doesn't mean that everyone has to be a customs expert, but again, we are creating a risk that these taxes do not get paid or are paid at the wrong time. And so because there is a tax risk there, we need to make sure there's an appropriate level of knowledge within the team to reduce that risk. And finally, and these are just examples, by the way, there are other areas, but things such as like document retention, attaining copies from your freight forwarders and the like. So that you can see the idea is you have to have a good list of documented processes and procedures in place to demonstrate, and you need this for Freeports as much as you do for customs warehousing and inward processing separately as well. So when you're going through this process, you've got to think about what your processes currently are and where you may need to shore up. Now, Julie actually mentioned the criteria about AEO earlier, but actually AEO does have a relationship here as well with any of these applications. Basically, when you're applying for any of these processes or procedures, AEO is always one way of achieving them, because AEO is a gold standard as to how to manage customs security, but also customs compliance processes. So if you have an AEO authorization, then actually you should already have ticked all the boxes there for something like customs warehousing and inward processing. The last thing to say here is that under the proposals that we currently have in place, and a lot of the HMRC Q&As that we've seen come through around Freeports, if you have a customs warehouse authorization already somewhere else in the UK and you later want to start to use a Freeport, you are already, or you can use that authorization as part of your storage process for your Freeport, for your customs Freeport. So you can actually be already authorized for your customs Freeport storage by using your customs warehousing authorization. So why I mention this is if it's maybe something that's in the distant future, but you are considering maybe using a Freeport in the future. If you get customs warehousing now on your premises, you're already a significant step there from the customs point of view, from the authorization point of view, to getting your Freeport storage authorization as well. Same with inward processing. Okay, so that's me for this part. I think now we're moving on to Q&A. So are there any questions generally?
Great, thanks, Nick. I think before we jump on to questions, let's pull up the polling questions outcome and just have a look at that, because as we talk about the different options that you have, as of course we're curious to see what kind of you're spontaneously thinking about all this. So great. So if you have a look at the questions and answers there, or sorry, the polling questions, what actions have you taken? So most of you have not taken any action, and that's, I think, not surprising. This is all a new area, and it's not going to be appealing to everyone. But hopefully what we've shown here is that the free port is not the the silver bullet in all situations. So most of you know actions taken, and some of you have informed yourselves and either decided not and decided to use or possibly to use. Okay. Polling question number 2 was if you're currently using a public customs warehouse. So meaning that you are using someone else's customs warehouse authorization. So you haven't applied yourself, and we have the answer there that 21%. That's actually, to me personally, that's I had expected a lower number. So that's really interesting. 21% using a third-party customs warehouse. Okay, good. Of course, the advantage with that is that you don't need to meet the AO standards yourself. But then again, that public customs warehouse may not be located where you want it to be, and you may want to have more control than that could offer. Right. Third question, do you currently operate a private customs warehouse? So 17% of you said yes, and 25% might consider applying. So again, that's interesting because it shows that most of you really, or almost most of you on the call, are already familiar with the things we've been talking about, the advantages and the requirements for customs warehousing. Fourth question, do you have an inward processing authorization? 25% of you have, 17% might be considering applying. Good, okay. Well, I think reasonably then, looking at the polling questions and answers, I can see why many of you have wanted to join us this morning to hear about whether Freeports could be a better option or just another option to what you have in place right now, or what you might want to put in place. Okay, fantastic. Well, that's really good. So we have a question coming in here, and I'll read out the question. May the courts of ENW be involved at some point, for example, for contracts arising for the processing of goods? I'm not familiar with that term, courts of ENW. Nick, Juliet, is this something that you could answer? May the courts of ENW.
I must say I'm not familiar with that term either, but maybe something that I can take away and try and find out answer for you.
Are we talking about the courts of England and Wales?
Ah, right, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think maybe it's not exactly an answer to the question. We will come back to you later, who posted this question. But the setting up of the Freeport, of course, is a government initiative. There are quite a lot of different governmental bodies involved in, as Juliet said, in different parts of the Freeport. So it's HM Treasury who kind of took the lead on this. It's HMRC who is tasked with enforcing customs regulations at the Freeport, etc. So yeah, I'm not sure that the courts of England and Wales would be involved in any kind of way. They certainly don't have a kind of an allocated role in terms of Freeports.
I'd say more generally is when it comes to court rulings, customs, because it's always been a fairly low priority tax for UK businesses, there isn't a huge amount of historic case law around customs, and the courts haven't historically had to get that involved. However, because it's now a UK tax under UK legislation, I think we will start to see just generally regarding customs more of a focus towards that, and so do expect there to be some it's certainly going to be within UK and England and Wales remit, and so you probably will see more in general customs case law being produced as a result of Brexit and Freeports, and this will fall under that.
Yeah, I get a question on a regular basis about controlled goods in Freeport, because initially when the announcements came out and the details started to be published about what you can and can't do in a Freeport, then at that time you could not store or process alcohol in the Freeport, which seems a bit odd, seemed a bit odd at the time now, and that has changed in the meantime. So actually from April, so from this month, you are allowed to have controlled goods in a Freeport. So with controlled goods, that means any goods that are subject to excise duty, so alcohol, tobacco, etc. Goods that are on the list of prohibited or restricted goods, or any goods that are subject to anti-dumping duties, countervailing duties, etc. So all of those, that type of products are called controlled goods, and you are allowed to have that in the Freeports as from this month. But there are some restrictions when it comes to the dealing with that. So as Juliet mentioned, when you're moving goods into a customs site inside the Freeport, then you can submit a simplified declaration, C21. But you can't do that for control goods. For control goods, you have to submit a full declaration. So just an example of that. There's some restrictions with control goods. And another quick question, just that I often get, is it possible for non-UK companies to use the Freeport? And I guess the background to that question is, well, if this is an initiative from the government to stimulate trade, it would be in the interest of the government to attract foreign investors to set up shop in a Freeport. But it's not actually intended, the Freeports are not intended for non-UK established businesses. So just like with customs warehouse and inward processing relief, you have to be a UK established business to take advantage of these special procedures, and it's the same thing for the Freeport. You have to be a UK established person. Now, there is some leeway on that, because the way that the Freeports are set up, it's possible for, say, a German company to use the Freeport if they work together with a UK established company who is then being the Freeport business on behalf of the German company. The UK established company does not need to take ownership of the goods, does not need to be a sale of goods to the UK company, but effectively it is, even though the word indirect representative is not mentioned in the legislation, it is the same principle that you have a UK established company acting as the representative of the non-UK established business, so that HMRC can get more comfort around not taking the same kind of financial risk. Right. If I can go on to a next question we got here from one of the participants. The question is, has a decision been taken yet on where inspections on arriving goods will take place if they are moving from one Freeport site to another Freeport site? So has a decision been taken on where inspection on arriving goods will take place when they move within the Freeport from one custom site to another custom site. I don't know the answer to that question. Nick and Juliet, is that something that you know for sure?
Not for sure. It's something that I will want to get back to you on, because there is definitely there has been guidance out as to the how you declare goods into and out of in between Freeports. But surprisingly, what I would say with Freeports is it is quite complex, and the guidance is still not fantastic. So I will need to look to see what the general move towards is with that, but I think the guidance is out there, just probably in multiple different locations.
Yeah. Spontaneously, my gut feeling is that there's not necessarily going to be a need for inspection of the goods when they move from one custom site to another custom site. The whole purpose is that it should be as little administrative, barriers as possible. So I would imagine that it will be truly exceptional if there's going to be a physical inspection from HMRC or Border Force when they move between those two different custom sites. But I guess it's possible, and I guess it's also depending on the nature of the goods. Control goods would be more likely to have some kind of requirement of waiting until a green light from HMRC before you move it from one custom site to another. But typically, I don't expect it to be needed. But we will come back to you. So thanks for that question. Any more questions before we close, because we're coming up close to 11 o'clock. And if you don't want to ask questions now, or if you haven't, you need more time to think about what we've been talking about, then feel free to send a question to us at any point in time, really. We are happy to, jump on a call if needed and talk about your specific situation. So feel free to email us. You have our details, and as I said, we will send out the slides and the recording later in the week. I think with that, then we'll close the session. So again, thanks very much on behalf of Nick and Juliet and myself and BDO for joining us this morning. Hopefully that was useful and interesting. Thank you.